Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
You ever open your phone, see something so damn petty and innocent, and feel like your whole chest caves in? Like something quietly shatters behind your ribs and nobody even notices because they're too busy hitting the like button. That's how it started. Just a regular Monday, just a regular scroll through social media while I waited for my laundry to dry. And there it was, a picture I didn't know I was bracing for. Lindsay, standing in the middle of a brand new apartment, beaming like she just won the damn lottery. High ceilings, quartz counters, floor-to-ceiling windows, all sunlight and privilege. She looked like a damn commercial for "Look how perfect my life is." On the island behind her, a shiny red bow, the kind you only ever see on cars or really big lies. The caption said, "Thanks, Mom. Best graduation gift ever." Graduation gift. That phrase hit harder than it had any right to, like it was wrapped in all the things I never got. I sat there with my phone in my hand, staring at that photo, trying to remember the last time my mom gave me anything that wasn't a guilt trip or unsolicited advice. And here's Lindsay, 6 years younger than me, fresh out of grad school, getting a 2-bedroom condo dropped on her like some kind of parental blessing from above. My fingers went numb. My stomach clenched. Not from jealousy exactly. From something meaner. Something older. Because what no one else knew, what Lindsay probably didn't even think about, was that once, back when I was 19 and barely hanging on, I'd sat in our kitchen and told Mom I needed help. Real help. Not a walk or a hug or a prayer circle, but a therapist. Someone to help me stop waking up every morning with my teeth clenched so tight I'd get headaches. Someone who could maybe help me understand why I kept spiraling. And I still remember how she looked at me like I'd asked for a Lamborghini. She said, "Jason, honey, we just can't afford that right now." I was barely out of high school, working nights at a grocery store, and I was starting to come apart at the seams. But therapy? No. That was too much. Too indulgent. Too unnecessary. But now, somehow, she could afford this? $200,000, maybe more, easy. And not alone. A gift. Just like that. For Lindsay. The good child. The one who didn't cause problems. The one who never had breakdowns or flunked out of college. The one who got to stumble and fall and be caught every single time, while I learned to hit the ground hard and get up on my own because no one was coming. I know what you're thinking. It's just money. Maybe she's doing better now. Maybe she feels bad and wants to do right by at least one of her kids. Maybe Lindsay really did earn it. Maybe. I've heard all those voices, too, but none of them sound like mine. None of them carry the taste of blood in the back of your throat when you realize your pain was optional, disposable, inconvenient. Ever had a moment where something small made you realize the people you love the most might have never really seen you? Drop a comment. I want to know I'm not the only one who's felt this kind of invisible. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept opening the picture, zooming in on details like some psycho. The wine glasses on the counter, the folded throw blanket, the rug that probably cost more than my first car. I wondered if Mom helped her pick it all out. If she cried when she handed over the keys. If she said something like, "I'm so proud of you," with that soft tone I only ever heard when Lindsay was in the room. I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. The way my mom used to leave my report cards unopened on the kitchen counter. The way she bragged about Lindsay's awards, but told people I was just still figuring things out. The Christmas where I showed up after a bad breakup and she handed me a $50 Target gift card while Lindsay opened a custom leather briefcase with her initials engraved in gold. People say you're not supposed to keep score in families. But what do you do when someone else keeps winning and you're not even allowed to talk about the game? And it's not like I hate Lindsay. That's the part that always confuses people when I try to explain this. I don't hate her. She's smart. She works hard. She's kind, maybe too kind sometimes. She always says she didn't ask for any of this, and I believe her. But that doesn't change the math. That doesn't erase the years I spent biting my tongue while she got everything and I got lectures about being grateful. When I brought it up once, years ago, Mom said, "Well, Lindsay doesn't ask for much." And I said, "That's because she doesn't have to." She didn't get it. She never does. The next day after seeing the post, I called my mom. I didn't even plan to. My thumb just hit the button out of spite. She picked up on the second ring, all sugar and sunshine. "Hi, honey. How's my boy?" And just like that, I was 5 years old again, being told to stop crying because boys don't cry unless they're bleeding. I didn't even bring up the apartment. I couldn't. Instead, I told her I was busy. She said she missed me. Said I never call anymore. Said, "You've gotten so distant and cold lately." And I just sat there, quiet, looking at my reflection in the dark window of my kitchen. I thought about all the birthdays she missed. All the times I cried alone in my car. All the times I pretended to be okay so she wouldn't say I was being dramatic. And I thought, cold? Distant? Maybe. Or maybe I just stopped coming back to a well that was always dry. And now she cries when I don't call on her birthday. When I was 16, I started waking up most mornings with this numb, dead-weight feeling in my chest, like something was sitting on top of me that I couldn't see, couldn't push off, couldn't explain to anyone in a way that wouldn't sound pathetic or crazy or just like teenage mood swings, which is how my mother described it the first time I tried to tell her I didn't want to go to school anymore. I had started skipping classes, not out of laziness or rebellion, but because even walking into a room full of other people made my skin crawl, and the idea of raising my hand or making eye contact felt like a goddamn panic attack waiting to happen. I would sit in the bathroom stall for entire periods, reading shampoo labels or staring at my shoes like they held the secret to whatever the hell was wrong with me. It wasn't long before I started hurting myself. Not in the dramatic, look at me way people like to imagine, no razor blades, no blood on the floor. It was quieter than that. Just fingernails digging into my arm until it bruised. Just wrapping rubber bands around my wrist until my fingers tingled. Just enough pain to distract from the other kind, the kind that sat in my throat like a brick every day and made me feel like I was rotting from the inside out. I didn't want to die, exactly. I just didn't want to feel like I was already dead. One night, I sat at the kitchen table, my hoodie sleeves pulled over my hands even though it was warm out, and I told my mom that I thought I needed help. Real help. I said the word therapy out loud like it was made of glass, half hoping she'd lean in and finally look at me the way she looked at Lindsay, with concern, attention, even just a little bit of that soft, mothering tone that had always been reserved for someone else. Instead, she blinked, stirred her tea, and said, "Jason, honey, boys don't need therapy. You need fresh air. You need Jesus. And maybe a summer away from all those screens." That summer, she signed me up for a Christian boys' camp out in the woods somewhere in upstate Pennsylvania, a place with a friendly-sounding name and a glossy brochure that promised reconnection with God through nature and mentorship. I didn't get to vote. She handed me the pamphlet like it was a blessing, not a sentence. "This'll fix your attitude," she said, "and your posture. And maybe even your soul." The camp was hell. No phones, no music, no real conversations. Just sermons disguised as therapy and counselors who smiled like used car salesmen while telling us how broken we were. Every day started at 6 in the morning with group prayer, followed by chores, followed by trust-building exercises where they made you fall backward into someone else's arms and pretend that counted as healing. They didn't care why you were depressed, just that you confessed to it, gave it a name, and then handed it over to Jesus like a dirty shirt. I spent 5 weeks faking it, learning how to smile on cue, learning how to say, "Yes, I feel better," when what I meant was, "I've just gotten better at hiding it." Meanwhile, Lindsay, who was 12 then, started violin lessons that same summer. Private ones, expensive ones, with a woman named Claudine who wore silk scarves and told my mom that Lindsay had gifted hands. That phrase stuck in my head like a thorn. Gifted hands. I remember walking into the house after I got back from camp, my arms still dotted with fading bruises from discipline drills, and hearing violin music float down the stairs like something out of a movie. My mom was in the kitchen, humming along and baking a goddamn peach cobbler like life was a Hallmark special. I stood there, suitcase still in hand, looking at her back, waiting for her to turn and say she missed me. She never did. Just told me to take my shoes off before I dirted the floor. Later that week, I sat at dinner with my fingers wrapped in fresh Band-Aids because I had picked at the skin too hard again, and Mom was beaming about how Lindsay had just been accepted into some youth orchestra. Dad nodded silently, chewing his food like this was any other evening, and I sat there wondering if I even existed at all in the world they were so proudly building without me. It was always like that, loud pride for her and quiet disappointment for me. And the worst part wasn't the neglect, it was the normalization of it. Like I was supposed to just understand my role, the shadow in the room, the lesson in contrast, the son who would never quite make her proud enough to tell anyone about me. Years later, when I brought up the camp during a rare argument, she said, "That place saved you." And I thought about the kid I was, the one who came home worse, not better, the one who started drinking at 17, the one who would go on to quit college, flake on jobs, ruin relationships, and I wondered if she even remembered how scared I'd been, how desperate, or if all she ever really remembered was the convenience of a temporary solution, and how nice the house was when it only echoed with violin strings instead of crying. Sometimes, I still think about that camp. About the cold showers, the forced confessions, the fake smiles. I wonder how many other boys went home quieter, not healed. I wonder if their moms noticed the difference. Mine didn't. Or maybe she did, and preferred it. Quieter was easier. Quieter was what she could handle. She thought I needed Jesus. What I needed was someone to say, "It's okay to not be okay," and actually mean it. Not send me off to the woods with a Bible and a stranger who thought depression could be shouted out of a teenage boy like a demon. But therapy? No. That was too expensive. And Lindsay's lessons? Those weren't even up for discussion. There's a certain kind of silence you learn to live with when you grow up being compared to someone who seems to be doing everything right, and in our family, that someone was Lindsay, always Lindsay, with her neat handwriting, her patient smile, and her uncanny ability to know exactly what Mom wanted to hear and how to say it in the softest, most perfect tone, like she was born with a built-in filter that kept her from ever sounding sharp or defensive or too real. By the time I turned 17, I had already figured out that my role was to be the foil, the messy one, the moody one, the complicated one that gave Mom something to complain about when she was fishing for compliments on how well she'd raised Lindsay. Lindsay wasn't just smart, she was the kind of smart that makes people look at your parents and say, "Wow, you must have done something right." She was winning essay contests in middle school, running her own tutoring sessions by 10th grade, and still somehow had time to volunteer on weekends at a pet adoption center while I was working night shifts at a gas station to cover my own phone bill and textbooks for community college. Not that anyone really asked how that was going, because nobody in our house ever really talked about my schooling unless it was to hint that maybe college just wasn't my thing. As if it wasn't the crippling anxiety or the exhaustion from working full-time while juggling classes that drove me to drop out, but rather a character flaw I was too lazy to fix. Mom never said it outright, but you could feel it in the air every time she brought up Lindsay's latest achievement. Her tone would change, it would soften, brighten, like someone turning on a lamp in a dark room, and she'd start listing all the things Lindsay was doing like she was reading from a holy scroll. "She's applying to NYU," she said one night over dinner, like it was already a sure thing, like Lindsay couldn't possibly fail at something so important. "She's writing her personal essay about the violin and how it taught her discipline and grace." Meanwhile, I was scraping by with D's in math and using my 20-minute lunch breaks to cram for midterms I barely passed, but none of that made it to the dinner table. And the kicker? When Lindsay did get into NYU, not that there was ever any doubt, Mom launched a GoFundMe to cover the extra costs of tuition and housing. Even though she had savings she never once mentioned when I was trying to scrape together enough for community college. She sent emails to the whole extended family, shared it on Facebook, told everyone how proud she was of her baby girl chasing her dreams in the big city. She even chipped in a few thousand herself, then casually mentioned it during a phone call as if it was no big deal. Well, I figured she shouldn't have to worry about money while she's trying to change the world, she said, and I had to bite my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I didn't blame Lindsay. Not really. Not directly. She never asked to be the favorite, and to her credit, she even tried, once or twice, to bring me into conversations or downplay her wins, like she knew how much it stung to be in her shadow. But by then, it was too late. The bitterness had started to calcify, hardening into something quiet and permanent that sat between my ribs and reminded me every time I walked into that house that I was the family's cautionary tale, not its pride. What made it worse was how Mom started using Lindsay's success like a mirror she could hold up to me every time I stepped out of line or even just stayed too quiet for too long. "You should talk to your sister more," she'd say. "She's got such a good head on her shoulders." Or, "You could have done something big too, if you'd just applied yourself a little harder." But the one that really hit, the one that stayed with me, came one Sunday when I picked her up from church because her car was in the shop, and while she was saying goodbye to some church friends in the parking lot, I heard her say it. Clear as day. "Jason was always just a little off. But Lindsay, she's got such a bright future." I didn't say anything. I just stood there with the engine running and my jaw clenched so tight I thought my molars might crack. She climbed into the car and started chatting like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just heard her sum up my entire existence in one careless sentence. And in that moment, I realized something that made my hands shake on the steering wheel. It wasn't just that she didn't understand me. It was that she never tried to. She had her version of me locked in her head, the sulky, unstable kid who never quite made the right choices, the one who always needed bailing out or calming down or dealing with. And Lindsay? She was the golden child, the one who made parenting look easy, the living proof that it wasn't Mom's fault if one of her kids didn't turn out right. Because clearly, it wasn't the parenting, it was me. I dropped her off that day and didn't go inside. I just waved her up the front steps and pulled away, my stomach twisted in that old familiar knot that came every time I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. But it did matter. It always mattered. Because no matter how far I drove, I still heard her voice in my head, saying those words again and again, just a little off, like a label someone had stuck to me before I even had the chance to choose who I was going to be. And the truth is, once someone decides you're broken, they stop trying to fix anything. They just live with the cracks and blame you for the drafts. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't hit you all at once, but instead creeps into your bones over years, through slow erosion, like water carving away at stone, and by the time you notice the damage, it's already deep enough that you can't tell where the cracks began. That's what my 20s felt like, this long, dull ache that sat in the center of my chest while everything else kept moving around me, fast and loud and relentless, like I was underwater watching the world sprint past and pretending I could still keep up. I had no real plan, just small bursts of trying that ended in even smaller failures. One job after another slipped through my fingers like sand. Some I quit because the anxiety ate me alive before I could even get comfortable. Others I lost because I'd get too quiet or miss too many shifts. Or because eventually someone would notice that I didn't smile much, didn't talk enough, didn't fit whatever box they were trying to force me into. I started at a warehouse, left after 3 months. Waited tables at a diner for a year until I cracked during a lunch rush and left mid-shift, apron still on, because I couldn't breathe. I tried working at a call center, then at a tire shop, then back to retail, but none of it stuck, and with every new start, the shame got heavier, like carrying around a backpack full of rocks that only I knew was there. I got married at 24, and I know that probably sounds fast or dumb, but at the time it felt like something solid to grab onto in the middle of all the chaos. Her name was Amy, and she was kind in the way people are when they think they can fix you. At first, I let her try. I even believed it might work. We moved into a one-bedroom apartment with thin walls and noisy pipes, where I tried therapy again for a while, real therapy. This time, no Jesus, no campfires. Just a tired-looking woman with a clipboard and a voice soft enough to make me feel safe for 50 minutes a week. But I was paying for it out of pocket, and between rent and groceries and my unreliable job at a shipping company, it didn't take long before the math stopped making sense. I remember the day I stopped going. Amy was at work. I called the therapist's office and left a voicemail, said something about needing to take a break, even though what I really meant was I can't afford to feel better right now. I never went back. The pain didn't go away. It just folded itself into something smaller and sharper that I carried in my chest like a knife. Amy left me 2 years later. She said she felt like I was always somewhere else, like she was living with a ghost who only occasionally showed up in his own body. I couldn't blame her. I didn't even cry when she packed her stuff. I just sat on the edge of the bed and nodded while she explained that this wasn't the life she wanted. And the worst part? I understood. I wouldn't have wanted to live with me either. Around that time, the drinking started, not loud, wild party drinking, but the quiet, keep it steady kind that doesn't make a scene, but still manages to hollow you out from the inside. A beer with dinner turned into 3. Weekends turned into blackouts. I wasn't drinking to forget anything specific. I was drinking because it dulled the sharp edges and made the silence in my apartment feel less like a scream and more like a hum. And nobody really said anything because nobody really saw me. My dad, if you can call him that, didn't ask questions. He never had. He was a master of stillness, a man built from television reruns and nods and long silences that filled every room he sat in. If I came over, he'd offer me a beer, then go back to whatever game he was watching, never asking how I was doing, never noticing when my hands trembled or my eyes looked dead. I don't think he ever meant to hurt me, but his absence was a wound that never healed, just scarred over so thick that even now, I forget it's there until someone brushes up against it the wrong way. And then there was the night on my mom's porch, late August, humid as hell, and I was drunk, too drunk, stumbling into the lawn chairs with a half-empty bottle in my hand and years of words in my throat that I couldn't keep inside any longer. I remember sitting down hard, breathing like I'd just run a mile, and looking at her through watery eyes that couldn't tell if I was crying or just sweating. I asked her the question I'd been carrying since I was 16, maybe younger. Why didn't you help me? She looked startled, like I'd slapped her, like the words themselves were violence. She blinked at me, like she needed time to translate what I was saying into something she could handle, and then she said the thing that still makes my stomach drop every time I think about it. Don't be dramatic. I've done everything I could for you. Everything she could. I stared at her like she'd just said the sky was green and the ocean was made of sand. Because in her mind, she really believed that. She wasn't lying to hurt me, she actually thought she'd done her part. She really believed that sending me to that camp, or brushing off my therapy requests, or ignoring every red flag I ever waved wasn't neglect, but some twisted version of love that I was too selfish to appreciate. And that was the moment it hit me, not just the anger, which had been there for years, but the hopelessness. The gut-deep understanding that I could scream my story into the sky and she'd still look at me like I was the one who'd failed her. That no matter how loud my pain got, she'd always hear it as noise, not a signal. What breaks you isn't always the big stuff, the explosions or betrayals or fights. Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the soft dismissals, the years of being unheard, the ache of realizing your parents loved you in theory, but not in the way you needed. And once that truth sets in, it's like trying to fix a shattered window by pretending the pieces were never broken in the first place. So I sat there, drunk and hollow, listening to the crickets in the yard and the ice clinking in her glass, and I understood something I hadn't before, that sometimes the worst kind of hurt is the one no one else even notices. And sometimes the people who were supposed to save you are the ones you spend your whole life saving yourself from. Thanksgiving is supposed to be about gratitude, about family, about gathering around a table filled with food and warmth and pretending, at least for one day, that everything in life makes sense or at least can be laughed about over pie and too much wine. But not all families are built that way, and some tables are more like battlegrounds with linen napkins and unsaid things folded neatly beside the silverware. I didn't want to go that year, I really didn't, but Lindsay had called twice and left me a voicemail with that same sugary tone she always used when she wanted something. Come on, Jace, just show up. For me. So I did, against my better judgment, against the voice in my gut that told me nothing good ever came from carving turkey under my mother's roof. The house hadn't changed. Same floral wallpaper in the foyer that Mom swore she'd replace one day. Same smell of cinnamon and bleach that always hit me like a punch to the chest the moment I stepped through the door. She hugged me like she was surprised I still had a pulse and said, "Look who finally decided to join the living," and I smiled the way you do when you don't want to start a war before the appetizers. Lindsay was already there, standing in the kitchen with a glass of wine and her hair done like she was posing for a magazine cover. She looked relaxed. I looked like someone who hadn't slept in 2 days. Maybe because I hadn't. Dinner was fine for about 20 minutes. We talked about safe things, work, weather, the latest drama with some distant cousin none of us really liked. Mom complimented Lindsay's blouse 3 separate times and offered her another serving before even noticing my plate was still half empty. Dad sat at the head of the table like a statue, chewing slowly, saying nothing, his eyes glazed over like he'd taken a sedative just to survive the night. Then someone, I don't remember who, made a joke about therapy, one of those casual digs people throw around when they've never had to sit across from a stranger and unpack their trauma like a suitcase filled with broken glass. And that's when I lost it, not loudly, not at first. I just said, calmly, I asked for therapy once. When I was 19. I begged for it, actually. Lindsay went quiet, her fork pausing midair. Mom looked at me like I'd just farted at the table. You remember that, right? I asked, and my voice cracked just enough that I hated myself for it. You told me we couldn't afford it. But then you bought Lindsay an apartment. A whole apartment. As a gift. The silence that followed was heavy, like someone had turned off the oxygen in the room. My mother laughed, not a real laugh, but one of those sharp, awkward bursts of noise people make when they're trying to deflect. Why are you bringing up old wounds during a holiday? She said, as if the timing was the only problem, as if it would have been fine any other day. Let's not ruin dinner with all that negativity. Lindsay stood up and quietly left the room. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. Like she'd heard it all before and didn't want to be part of it again. Dad didn't even look up from his plate. Just kept cutting his turkey like this was a normal Thursday. And me? I snapped. Not in the dramatic, throw a chair kind of way. But my voice got loud. My hands were shaking. I said things I'd rehearsed in my head for years, but never dared to speak in front of them. I told her how I remembered everything, the camps, the dismissals, the cold shoulder every time I asked for something that didn't come wrapped in practicality or scripture. I told her that Lindsay never had to ask twice for anything, while I had to convince her that my pain was even real. And she just sat there, arms crossed, her mouth set in that familiar, thin line she always wore when she felt like the victim. You've always been so sensitive, Jason, she said, and that was it. That was the sentence that broke me. Not because it was new, but because it was the same line she used when I was 13 and shaking in the principal's office, or 16 and begging not to be sent to that camp, or 22 and slurring through tears on her porch. I stood up, grabbed my coat, didn't even touch the pie I had brought, the one she hadn't acknowledged. I said, "You don't want to hear me, and I'm done whispering to people who plug their ears." And then I walked out. Past the kitchen, past the framed photos of Lindsay's graduation and violin recitals, and nothing of me past age 10. Past the dog that died years ago but still had a shrine in the hallway. I got in my car and drove until I couldn't see the house anymore, until the tightness in my chest started to give way to something that almost felt like breathing. I didn't go back the next year. Or the year after that. Not for birthdays. Not for holidays. Not even when Lindsay called and left messages saying Mom missed me, that she was sorry, that maybe I should just come for dessert. I didn't respond. Because once you've screamed into a void long enough, and all you hear back is how dramatic you're being, eventually the silence becomes safer than the noise. Would you go back to a table where no one hears you speak? Because I couldn't. Not anymore. Not when I knew the only seat they ever saved for me was the one they expected me to stay quiet in. It was a Wednesday when she called, late afternoon, just after I'd gotten off work and was standing in the grocery store staring blankly at a shelf full of soup cans, wondering if I had the energy to cook or if I'd settle for microwave ramen again. The phone buzzed once, then twice, and I pulled it from my pocket, already bracing myself to hit decline, already assuming it was a telemarketer or someone asking about my car's non-existent extended warranty. But there it was, her name, full screen, glowing like a siren. Mom. After 2 years of silence. After 2 years of holidays skipped, birthdays ignored, voicemails from Lindsay that I never returned. After 2 years of finally learning how to breathe without waiting for the next emotional ambush. And now she was calling. I don't know why I answered. Maybe it was reflex. Maybe it was guilt, though I had been working hard to let go of that particular poison. Maybe I just wanted to hear if her voice still made my stomach twist. It did. The moment I said hello, she burst into tears. Not the soft, polite kind of crying that people do when they want sympathy, but the loud, messy kind that comes from a place of real fear or maybe desperation. At first, I couldn't make out what she was saying, just fragments between sobs, something about missing me, about how she hadn't known how bad things were, about how she just wanted her son back. I stood there in front of the soup cans like I was frozen in time, listening to this woman fall apart through the speaker, and instead of feeling sorry for her, I felt detached, like I was observing someone else's life, someone else's mother, someone else's pain. And I think that was the moment I realized something that should have been obvious long ago. She wasn't calling because she finally understood what I'd been through. She was calling because she didn't like the silence anymore. She didn't like being shut out. She didn't like having her mirror, the one that reflected back what a good mother she believed herself to be, taken away. She didn't say anything about the apartment. Not a word. Not even a half apology or a casual mention. She didn't bring up the therapy she'd denied me, or the camp she'd forced me into, or the years she spent praising Lindsay while pretending I was a phase she'd eventually outgrow. She didn't say she was sorry for what she had done, she only said she was sorry for how things had turned out, which isn't the same thing at all. Saying you're sorry something happened is not the same as taking responsibility for causing it. She said things like, I just don't know what I did wrong, and I've always loved you, Jason, you know that, and I'm your mother, for God's sake, as if the title alone should be enough to grant her access to my life again, no questions asked. She kept asking, why are you being so cold to me? Like I had flipped a switch one day without warning, like the distance between us had appeared overnight instead of being built inch by inch from years of emotional neglect and quiet betrayals. And still, even in that moment, part of me wanted to comfort her. That's the worst part of being the one who is hurt. You still feel responsible for everyone else's feelings. I wanted to say, it's okay, even though it wasn't. I wanted to say, I forgive you, even though I hadn't decided if I ever could. I wanted to believe that maybe this was the moment, the breakthrough, the beginning of something new. But I couldn't, because nothing she said was about me. It was all about her. Her guilt. Her confusion. Her pain. At one point, she said, I feel like I lost my son, and I almost laughed, because I wanted to scream, you didn't lose me. You just never looked for me when I was right in front of you. You didn't lose me, Mom. You left me behind every time you chose to pretend I was fine because it made your life easier. You left me behind when you ignored the warning signs, when you dismissed my pain as drama, when you funded my sister's dreams and told me mine were too expensive. You left me behind and called it parenting. Now you want me back, but only if I come without baggage, without blame, without all the inconvenient memories. I didn't say all of that. I didn't say much at all. I let her cry. I let her talk. I let the silence hang between us every time she paused for something I wouldn't give: comfort, reassurance, the version of me that used to pretend everything was okay just to keep the peace. Eventually, she stopped crying. Her voice got softer, more controlled. She asked if I'd come by for dinner sometime. She said she was making pot roast, my favorite. I hadn't eaten pot roast in over a decade. I told her I'd think about it. She said, "Okay, that's all I ask," and then, just before hanging up, she said it again, like a question she already knew the answer to. "I just don't understand why you're so cold to me now." I stood there a long time after the call ended, the phone still in my hand, the soup can still in front of me, the grocery store lights buzzing softly overhead. People passed by with carts, with screaming kids and shopping lists, and lives that didn't feel as heavy as mine suddenly did again. And I thought about how easy it would be to go back, to forgive, to sit at her table and pretend nothing had ever happened. But I also thought about every night I spent wondering what was wrong with me, every time I tried to explain and got told I was too sensitive, every moment I needed my mother and got silence in return. And I realized I wasn't cold. I was just finally done being burnt. I don't know what exactly convinced me to go, whether it was the slow erosion of my boundaries or the pressure of Lindsay's increasingly gentle messages, each one more disarming than the last, or maybe it was just curiosity, ugly, bitter curiosity, about what $200,000 of parental favoritism looked like in real estate form. Whatever the reason, I agreed to visit the apartment, the one Mom gave to Lindsay, with about the size of a car tire and a caption dripping with sugar about how dreams really do come true. Lindsay said it would mean a lot to her if I came by, just to see it, just to catch up, just to make things feel normal again, though we both knew normal had never really been part of our shared vocabulary. She buzzed me in from downstairs, and I took the elevator up to the 4th floor, my palms sweating, my chest tight, heart knocking against my ribs like it wanted to turn back. The hallway was spotless and smelled faintly of lavender and fresh paint, like a model unit in a glossy brochure. She opened the door before I could even knock, already smiling, already performing the version of herself that made people believe she lived in a rom-com instead of a family where the foundations were cracked and nobody wanted to look down long enough to see how deep it went. The apartment was beautiful in the way Pinterest boards are beautiful, minimalist, stylish, not a single object out of place. There was a big window that let in soft afternoon light, a gray couch that looked like it had never been sat on, open shelves lined with color-coded books and plants that weren't dying. Lindsay offered me a drink, water or coffee, something polite and non-threatening, and then gave me the tour like a real estate agent trying to close a deal. "This is the kitchen," she said, gesturing to a marble island that looked more expensive than every car I'd ever owned combined. It came fully furnished. Mom wanted to make sure it felt like home right away. I nodded, said something vague and kind like "it's nice," even though what I really wanted to say was, "This place is a monument to everything I never got." Her boyfriend was there too, some guy named Eric who was tall and safe-looking, the kind of man who probably paid his taxes early and never raised his voice. He was pleasant in a forgettable way, offered a handshake and a smile, and then excused himself to the balcony, leaving us alone in the kitchen where the light bounced off stainless steel appliances and made my reflection look like a ghost in the oven door. That's when I saw it, the ribbon. The same massive red bow from the social media post, the one that sat on the counter in the original picture like the final flourish on a very expensive gift. It was crumpled and stuffed halfway into the kitchen trash, still faintly glittery, still trying to hold its shape even though it had clearly been crushed under the weight of banana peels and coffee grounds. Something about it hit me in the stomach, this careless disposal of what had once been such a loud symbol, and I had to turn away before I said something I couldn't walk back. Lindsay was talking, something about grad school, about going abroad for a year and Airbnb the place while she was gone to make extra cash, and I stood there nodding like I was listening. But my ears were ringing and all I could think about was how easily some people get handed soft landings while others spend their whole lives free-falling and being told to enjoy the breeze. I wandered down the hallway without asking, just needed a moment away from her voice and the too perfect lighting, and ended up in what she called the guest room, though it looked more like a storage space dressed up to look livable. A small bed, a desk, a closed closet door. And on the shelf above the bed, a photo album, big, dusty pink, with gold lettering that read Lindsay's firsts. I don't know what made me open it. Maybe I was hoping to find something that would soften me. Maybe I just wanted proof that I wasn't making all this up in my head. Page after page of Lindsay's childhood stared back at me, her first recital, her first sleepover, her first trip to Disney, smiling in every picture like she had no idea she was being curated for greatness. There were notes in the margins, little captions in Mom's handwriting. Lindsay playing her first full piece, or so proud of her courage today. The kind of sentimental scrapbooking that people do when they want to remember every detail, to lock joy in a box and revisit it whenever the world feels too big. And then, suddenly, there I was. Twice. Once, barely noticeable in the background of a picture where Lindsay was blowing out birthday candles, my face blurry and half obscured by her elbow. And once more, clearer, in a photo where I was about 16, holding her tiny violin while she adjusted her bow with a serious look on her face. I wasn't smiling. I looked tired. My eyes looked like they belonged to someone twice my age. And in the margin, Mom had written, "Jason helping Lindsay practice. What a great big brother." I stared at that sentence for a long time, the ink faded but still legible, and I realized that was probably the only sentence in the whole album where I was mentioned at all. A side character in someone else's fairy tale. A supporting role in the story of the child she had chosen to remember. When I came back to the kitchen, Lindsay looked up from her phone and smiled again, said, "You okay?" And I nodded because the truth was too complicated for small talk. I said something about needing to get going soon, about having work early the next day, and she didn't press me. She just hugged me and said, "I'm glad you came," and I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this was a step forward. But all I felt was heavier than when I walked in. I didn't bring up the album. I didn't mention the bow in the trash. I didn't ask why my name only showed up once in 100 photos, or why even now, with everything spread out in bright light and soft furniture, the silence still clung to the walls like mold. On the way home, I drove in silence. No music, no calls, just the sound of my tires on the road and the quiet realization that even when you walk through the front door of a place built with love, it doesn't mean it was ever meant for you. Some gifts are only gifts if they're given to be shared, not flaunted. And some homes will never feel like yours, no matter how many times you're invited inside. There's this question that's been haunting me for longer than I'd like to admit, the kind that whispers in the quiet moments when I'm lying awake at night or walking through the aisles of a store with no real purpose. Just killing time because I don't want to sit still long enough to hear my own thoughts echo too loudly. It's not a new question. It's not even complicated on the surface. But it sticks and it burrows and it waits until I've convinced myself I'm fine again, only to tap me on the shoulder and ask, "Do you owe forgiveness to someone who never really said sorry?" Not just a sorry for the outcome kind of apology, but the real thing, the kind where a person sits down and looks you in the eye and names the thing they did, the damage they caused, without explaining it away or dressing it in excuses or calling it love in a tough form. I keep circling this question like a dog circling a patch of ground that's been walked on too many times, familiar, worn, and never quite comfortable. Last week, I brought it up in therapy. Yes, I'm back in therapy now. I pay for it out of pocket still. No GoFundMe. No cheerful checks from home. No, we're so proud of you for taking care of yourself messages. Just me, a quiet office on the second floor of a building that smells like old paper and peppermint oil, and a therapist who doesn't try to fix me, but just lets me talk long enough to realize the things I'm most afraid to admit out loud. I told her I was thinking about cutting my mom off completely. Not in a dramatic, burn it all down kind of way, but in the way you slowly close a door and don't look back, not out of rage, but out of necessity. I said, I don't want to keep pretending anymore. I don't want to sit through another dinner where we talk about recipes or weather or church gossip while she skips over the fact that I nearly didn't survive my 20s and she still hasn't asked why. And my therapist, calm as always, just nodded and asked, "What would you lose by walking away?" And I didn't have an answer ready. Because the truth is, I don't know what I'd lose. Maybe nothing. Maybe just the illusion that someday she'll finally say the right thing, finally see me for who I really am instead of the version of me she keeps in her head, like a dusty photo album where the pages stop somewhere around age 10. But then there's the other side, the guilt, the grief, the deeply ingrained voice that says family is forever and blood is thicker, and all those other phrases people use when they want you to keep showing up to a table that's never had a chair pulled out for you. Sometimes I wonder if staying in touch, even at a distance, is some twisted act of hope. Like maybe, in the small talk and the surface-level conversations, there's a thread that still connects us, and if I cut it, even gently, I'll float away into something even lonelier than what I'm used to. So no, I haven't decided. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the hardest decisions aren't the ones you act on, but the ones you carry with you every day, trying them on in your mind like clothes that never quite fit. Some days, I feel ready to let go, to stop answering her calls, to leave her texts unread, and let the silence grow long enough that even she can hear it. Other days, I find myself rereading old birthday cards, looking for a sentence that proves she loved me the way I needed, the way I still want her to, even though I know it's probably not there. I think about how she says I'm cold now, that I don't open up, that I keep her at arm's length like a stranger. And the part that really stings is, she's not wrong. I have grown cold, or maybe just quiet. And not just with her. With people in general. With the parts of life that require trust or vulnerability or showing your belly and hoping you don't get kicked again. I've learned how to be polite, how to smile at the right times, how to change the subject when something brushes too close to the bone. Because once you've been told over and over that your pain is too loud, too inconvenient, too expensive, you learn to carry it quietly. You wrap it up tight and keep it to yourself like a shameful secret, and when people ask how you're doing, you say fine, because it's easier than explaining why the answer is anything but. But here's the thing no one tells you. Silence doesn't protect you forever. Eventually, it turns on you. It starts to rot from the inside out, and one day you wake up and realize that even you don't know how to talk about your own story anymore without flinching. So when she says she just wants her son back, I wonder who she means. Does she mean the version of me who still answered her texts immediately, even when they made me angry? The version who showed up for dinner and bit his tongue until it bled just to keep the peace? The version who smiled for family photos like he hadn't cried in his car just 20 minutes before arriving? Because that version of me wasn't real. That version was built on suppression and shame and trying to earn affection that should have been unconditional. I don't know if I'll ever be the son she thinks she remembers. I don't know if I should even try. And I don't know if forgiveness is something I owe her or something I owe myself. Maybe I'll call her next week. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll keep walking this tightrope between resentment and longing until it breaks beneath me or I decide to step off on my own terms. But for now, I'm still standing here, still undecided, still learning that healing isn't a destination. It's a decision you have to keep making over and over, one honest moment at a time. She says I'm distant now. Cold. Maybe I am. But if you burn someone long enough, eventually they stop reaching for warmth.